We all miss. We all make mistakes. Even the Holy Family. Even Jesus missed here with all of this. Hi everyone, Angelo here. I'm a creative and theologian, and it's the Feast of the Holy Family. So we're in Luke chapter 2. And this story is when Jesus went and get lost. So they went to Jerusalem. Every year they would go to Jerusalem for the Passover, meaning him and his family. And, they went to celebrate, and then they leave and they're on their way home. But then after about a day or so, Mary and Joseph, they say, wait now, Jesus gone? Where he is? And then they're looking all over, they can't find him, They're going back to Jerusalem. And then it says here, 3 days later, they found him in the temple, and they found him sitting around like the doctors, and some translation might have like the scholars and whatnot. And he there listening to them, and he asking questions too. So Mary comes to him and she like, boy, how you gonna do this to me? And he's like, well, do what all? Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. But they didn't really understand, right, Mary in particular. And it says, it ends up by saying, his mother stored up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and people. The translation say men, but people. But taking this, right? You are the parents of the Son of God. And then he go missing. You lose him. Like, can you imagine that? I mean, in general, I would imagine, I can't really, but imagine the fear that grips any parent when they realize the child missing, even if for 5 minutes. And I'm sure it's the same fear that gripped Mary and Joseph. At the same time, if we were to take this story traditionally, even though things like Mary not understanding and his parents not understanding shows that we don't necessarily need to, and probably shouldn't either. But if we were to say the story traditionally and even maybe a little bit closer to literally, imagine if they're like, we lost the savior of the world. And I mean, like I said, I don't think there's anything dramatic like in this story here, right? But it is the point that I would like to start from, meaning that we all miss. We all make mistakes, even the Holy Family. So the thing is, nobody has this life thing figured out, right? Or at least I don't imagine so. I have yet to meet anybody who has it figured out. It's like nobody has things so on lock that they have zero worries. And I mean, some people I'm sure come close, right? I'm sure some people have like systems and whatnot in place to make their life flow a little bit smoother. But really and truly, end of the day, sometimes we just miss. Sometimes we just make mistakes. Sometimes we just drop the ball. And I mean, if you think about it, that's okay. Life isn't an exam. I mean, sometimes we just miss, and that is fine. So like a recent example for me, if I had to reflect on my own life, like is this video here, right? Where usually I would post my videos at about 6 p.m. on a Thursday. And at this point it's about a little over 24 hours late. And to be very honest, I feel like I'm just missing with this video in general. And I mean, yes, sure, this example I'm using here from my own life would be a facetious example, because it's not like there's any major consequence to this. But really and truly, the point is, sometimes we all miss. Sometimes we just make mistakes. And even the Holy Family made mistakes when they were raising Jesus. And even Jesus himself would have been part of said mistakes. Because to be fair, he probably planned this. I don't think, or at least I don't imagine it was necessarily a spontaneous thing. Perhaps it was. But if this is something they were used to doing, meaning going up to Jerusalem every year, going up to the temple every year, he probably was not reflecting, like, you know what, this year I'm going to switch it up. This year I'm going to do something different. And maybe, again, perhaps it was spontaneous, but in general, maybe he might have fallen in love with things like the rituals, or maybe he was enamored with the God talk. I mean, I get it, right? I could relate. But Paul, Mary, and Joseph, they're running around scrambling, trying to find them. Only for Jesus to jump out himself and be like, what were they looking for me for? Now, I don't know about your parents, but I know if I was to tell my mother that, especially in a situation like this, son of God or not, I was getting sent back to God regardless. It looked though like, because the part of the story here where it says, he then went down with them and came to Nazareth and lived under their authority. It looked like they managed him enough that he was like, all right, you know what, we're good. I'll be good after that. And it does make me wonder too, if when the next year came around, they just watched each other and was like, should we take him back this year? Or we should leave him home? It was probably also innocent too though. Because even Jesus missed here with all of this in this scenario. Because he probably wasn't even thinking about how Mary and Joseph would have felt. And I remember myself being in like my mid to late teens and being out and about, but not communicating my whereabouts with anybody. And my parents and my grandparents would have to be like, okay, yes, you might be good, you might be safe, but if you don't say something, how are we going to know that you're good and you're safe? And how would you feel if you had children and not know their whereabouts? And I was like, you know what? Okay, yes, you're right. And I had to learn to communicate after that. And I know I'm not the only person with that story. I mean, most, if not all of us, I'm sure have their stories very similar to Jesus. And it's in our similar stories is where we can meet Christ. And it's in our humanity and our human stories that God gets the opportunities to meet us. And we have the opportunities to respond. Because as we know, Jesus' story moved from this here in Luke chapter 2 being lost in the temple to him a few years later going to the temple and making mass. Like, he would have caused so much chaos when he decided to what we call cleanse the temple. And stories like this is what makes me believe, or is lean more toward the side of Jesus. In those years that we don't know about, he would have worked alongside his religious leaders. Because he seemed to have this fascination for the God talk, or some people might say the theology, but from his youth. And I don't doubt that this episode here would have been a fundamental part of him doing what he did go on to do at the temple later on, meaning to cleanse the temple. So, just like the Passion story too, it took him 3 days to be found. And it took his parents, 3 days to find him in the temple. So, of course, as Christians, for us, it parallels the resurrection story. And I suppose this was like a passion story for Jesus too. Because he found something that he was passionate about. And then we don't know where he is for 3 days, and then he is found. And, because Mary and Joseph had this yearly routine of going, in Jesus' youth, in his childhood, maybe he might have felt like, God, boy, it's the same thing every year. You know what? This time, especially because I feel on this call inside of me to maybe stay back and talk and find out, have conversations with different people about God and our religion and all that. Jesus probably said to himself, I'm going to switch up the routine this year. I'm going to make things interesting. I'm going to do something different. And we too, we can do things differently as well, different from routines. And the reason I say that is because, of course, this is the last week of the year, at least at the time of publishing this. And our whole lives might feel routine and cyclical. So as we approach 2025, maybe we could do like Christ. maybe we could spend some time reflecting on what we would like to do differently, even if it feels scary at first. Because even though it might be challenging, and we might only miss at first when we change things up and try to do things differently, ultimately, it is okay. Even if it feels like we miss bad, I think we can trust God enough to take all that we offer and to work it for God's greater glory and for the common good of all of creation. So it's a journey that we could all appreciate. And we can appreciate it regardless, for the good and for the bad, for the wholeness of life, for the fullness of life. And we can trust that as long as we are true to who God made us to be, we will discover all the favor we need along the way. Anyways, that's it from me this week. And as always, I appreciate you so much for watching. Have a happy 2025, and thank you.